kick it off this season, we are really delighted to have Stacey Swigart, who is one of the curators for our amazing show currently on view in the Fisher Brooks Gallery in the Hamilton Building here at PAFA, Philadelphia Revealed. It's on view through December 1st. So if you have not seen it yet, please come and check it out. It's not to be missed. I am not from Philadelphia and learned so much about the city being part of the show. So I'm really grateful for that. So Stacey is going to talk for about 45 minutes. And then we'll open up for some Q&A, and we should be wrapped up just about by 1 o'clock to get everyone back onto their day. But Stacey's going to talk about the Atwater Kent Collection at Drexel. She is the director there and has worked since 2018 on collections management and curatorial tasks related to the former historic Philadelphia History Museum. She has worked in institutions like Valley Forge Historical Society, the Please Touch Museum, Historic Germantown, and has curated everything. I love this. This is like my favorite part of your bio, Stacey. Has curated everything from George Washington's breeches to Barbie's dream house. Her expertise includes exhibition development, museum management, collection policies, education program design, and much, much more. And we are so excited to have you here today. So with that, I am going to turn it over to you, and we'll be back for the Q&A.
Okay. Thanks so much, Leah. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I'm going to go ahead and start to share my screen here. Give me a second. Oops, it's at the very end, sorry. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. So, a little bit about the Atwater Kent Collection and a little bit of background of the former Philadelphia History Museum. So the Atwater Kent Collection and the Atwater Kent Museum was founded in 1938, and it was the City History Museum for Philadelphia. And when it first started, the powers that be, the organizers, everybody, the curator, director, started collecting a little bit of anything and everything. It did have a maritime bent to it, it seemed. So there was quite a bit of maritime material that was collected into the collection. And a lot of the materials in that original museum, which of course was down on 7th Street, the former Franklin Institute building, which is still there, a National Historic Landmark building, and owned by the city of Philadelphia, or excuse me, the Atwater Kent family, but managed by the city of Philadelphia. It did revert back to the Atwater Kent family. With the collection that was done with the former Atwater Kent Museum, they had collected a variety of businesses and organizations and companies who were donating materials, loaning materials, and so the foundation of the collection was pretty rich with a lot of material, but there was no real sort of curatorial theme through it, other than let's collect this stuff because we want to have it on display. And some things were collected because this would be material that you would see in a history museum anyway, or things that people would have used in Philadelphia. There was quite a bit of rich material that had a huge Philadelphia stamp on it, particularly the business and organizational foundational documents and so forth of a variety of different companies. The first object actually that came into the collection was a piece that was done through the Works Project Administration. It was a large-scale model of Elfreth's Alley, and some of you might be familiar with it if you ever went to the Atwater Kent Museum, because it was on display for years and years and years. And I remember seeing it as a young child going on a field trip and being fascinated by it. So it's nice that it's still in existence, and we hope one day to have it out on loan at some point. The museum itself didn't open until 1941 and had a variety of exhibits and displays within the museum. And over the years, it kind of struggled to sort of have its footing, and it had a lot of fits and starts. And early on, not a huge amount of museum processes were in place. So a major collections initiative that they decided to start cataloging the collection happened in 1977. And they just kind of went around and numbered things 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then thousands and thousands of numbers later, we still have remnants of those 1977 numbers in our object IDs that we still look at today. Around 2009, the museum closed for major renovations and was rebranded and reopened and renamed the Philadelphia History Museum at the Atwater Kent. And then eventually, as we all know, the museum closed in 2018. And that's actually when I first came on board. My first day was the day after the museum had closed, and immediately jumped into taking a look at the collection and organizing it into a whole series of evaluation categories, as Drexel was hired by the city of Philadelphia to do an evaluation and inventory of everything in the collection. We're still working on that. We've been obtaining grant funds and so forth to look at all the objects and see, based on a whole scale system, of what story do these objects tell related to the history of Philadelphia. In 2023, thanks to PAFA, we were able to open our Seeing Philadelphia exhibit in the McGuire Gallery, and then started working almost immediately after it closed on Philadelphia Revealed. There are over 130,000 items in the collection, so you can imagine it's quite massive. Some things are amazing, exciting, associated with really historical characters related to Philadelphia. And then some of the more mundane and sort of the everyday stuff. And some of that stuff are the items that I really like a lot, because they tell some really rich stories of Philadelphia's history, whether it's business, whether it's people, whether it's companies, retail, you name it. There's some really, really amazing things that tell the story of Philadelphia. So Philadelphia Revealed is a pretty massive history exhibit, because we have over 650 items on display. And you can actually increase that a little bit if you count every single photo in the photo album, if you count every single button on the Neil Benson button jacket. There's 749 buttons on that jacket alone. And we documented every single one individually. And so anyway, the exhibit itself is pretty rich and is organized into a whole series of categories. We do have an exhibition catalog, and so some highlights are in that. And this is the 9 sections that we have related to Philadelphia Revealed. So we hope you get to come in and see it if you haven't already. So I'll just jump into some of the art. So this was a really fun portion of doing this exhibit, because we were able to bring out some pieces of art. And I'll say we have probably over 1,100 pieces of artwork in the collection, mostly paintings, but there are some watercolors and smaller things. And I don't necessarily count all the sketches and things that you might find in a sketchbook or drawings or things like that in that number. It's mostly paintings. These 2 pieces were something that we really wanted to share because they're quite unusual. The grisaille paintings by Rembrandt Peale, these are circa 1802, and you can see it's a monochrome painting. They're quite large. They're actually painted on the backs of doors that were used in the Peale Museum. So we did want to be able to share that And so you can see the imagery, and just a little background. I'm sure you're all familiar with Peale Museum and the painting that PAFA has. I didn't include that here, but the Charles Wilson Peale holding back the curtain on the long gallery in the Peale Museum. You can see it opened in 1784 as an art museum, moved in 1794, moved again in 1802 to Independence Hall, moved to the Chestnut Street Arcade in 1827 after the death of Charles Wilson Peale. And then eventually the collection was sold in 1849 and 1854. And what's interesting is the city of Philadelphia did buy a portion of many of those portraits, and they ended up in the Independence Hall collection. The sculpture, grisaille painting with the bust of Ben Franklin is fairly simple, but here's the cool part, and that is the fact that it's on the back of this door. Now, the door's been supportive, and I will say the door is actually quite heavy. It's most likely oak, and you can see from some of the elements of the door that at one point it had Peale's Museum printed or painted on it as a directional. Not sure what actually the door was to, whether it was an inside closet or something. Who knows what it was? However, it was recycled by Rembrandt Peale to use for these paintings. You can also see here the cutout where the door handle was located. And then the second grisaille painting, we have the artist, and again, very simple. And again, I love this door. And on the back of this one, you can see, if you look closely, it was for pictures. And again, it's something I'd love to investigate a little bit more to sort of figure out what exactly the pictures meant in the building at the time in the early 1800s. And again, the cutout for the door handle. The next artist I want to sort of feature is David Bustle Bowser, and we have a really rich collection of materials by him. He lived in 1820 to 1900, and he was a self-taught artist, and he and his wife together had this great company and business that they created banners and signs and uniform hats and fire department paraphernalia, all sorts, regalia, things like that, and also portraits. He is well known for some of his portraits. He did, probably his most famous was Abraham Lincoln, and then John Brown. John Brown is actually one you'll see in a second that we have in the collection that was given to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, which was then given to the Atwater Kent Museum. They lived near present-day 4th and Spring Garden Streets, and not only were they business people, but they were also activists and philanthropists in Philadelphia and beyond, to not just 19th century Black Philadelphia, but also totally into other communities. And so, for example, something that we have in our collection, and I will say it's not on display, but I'm sharing a picture of it here. There's a cane, and I'm highlighting the tip of it, the brass engraving, because it's presented to David Bustle Bowser from the Odd Fellows of New Orleans for the services that they rendered to the yellow fever epidemic there in New Orleans in 1878. So he and his wife provided funds to the African American community there during 1878 and that outbreak to help get people well, just anything they could do to help that community. And I think it sort of speaks to the mindset of the Bowsers, not only in Philadelphia, but beyond, for anybody who was in need. So some of the paintings that we have in the collection, we did put on display in Philadelphia Revealed, and in various states of condition is why not everything was put in. We had to sort of figure out what was going to be best for being on display. I will say he was born in Philadelphia. He was the grandson of Cyrus Bustle, who was a former enslaved man who ended up purchasing his freedom, his own freedom, and helped found the Philadelphia Free African Society. And he was also a cousin of the artist Robert Douglas Jr., who was a pupil of Thomas Sully, and who also trained at PAFA. So even though Bustle Bowser was not a trained artist, he had connections to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which is a great piece of Philadelphia history. So not only was he this great businessman and activist and philanthropist, but he knew a lot of those political leaders of the day. And in 1867, he was appointed to the leadership of the Pennsylvania Equal Rights League with William Forton and Octavius Catto. Something that we have in the exhibit right now, too, is we have a banner from the Octavius Catto Lodge, which is another aspect. So there's all these threads that kind of run together with these different objects that you'll see within the exhibition. The eagle painting itself was actually a gift to the Atwater Kent Museum in the 50s by Ida. Her name was Mrs. J.C. Asbury, but it's Ida Elizabeth Bowser Asbury, and she was the only daughter of David Bustle Bowser. And she gave this in 54. She gave the John Brown portrait in 1955 to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. And between the two organizations, she sort of spread the wealth of some of her father's materials into collections in Philadelphia. There is this interesting portrait, too, of an unidentified man that we have in the exhibit. And this is also, again, a David Bustle Bowser painting. And we're not quite sure who it is. There's some conjecture that it could be a portrait of the actor Edwin Forrest in character, in some sort of theatrical role. We don't know that. He's got an interesting shape to his head, which everybody sort of finds really fascinating. And he's got quite a bit of character. And so here's a representation of some of the fire regalia or paraphernalia that he did. This is a parade hat, and it's the United States Fire Company. And you can see, again, another eagle, shield, very patriotic symbolism that you can find on a lot of this parade material that was used in the 19th century. And then probably the most famous portrait that he did was John Brown. And what's interesting about this is John Brown came to Philadelphia, and John Brown actually visited and stayed with David Bustle Bowser. And Ida, the daughter, mentions that she remembers him sitting for a portrait. We're not quite sure. There's a little bit of conjecture with some of this, and more research needs to be done to sort of flesh some of it out. Supposedly, John Brown was mostly clean shaven up until around the time of Harper's Ferry, which was 1859. So we're not quite sure whether this would have been done around that time or not, or if this is sort of based off of another artist's work that was done later from memory. Again, it's something we hope to be able to research in the future. It does add a lot to, there's a small but rich little collection of John Brown material in the collection. Most of that we don't know where it came from, accession-wise, and what the source was for some of the materials, such as his shackles that he has, the pike, the musket. They all came through the Historical Society of Pennsylvania collection, but there's an unknown source to that. The next artist that I want to spend a little bit of time with is Federico Fernandez Cavada. He's a really, really interesting gentleman. with a rich background. He's an actual immigrant to Philadelphia. And so he was born to parents in Cuba. His father, let me get his name right, Isidoro Fernandez Cavada. He married a woman named Emily Howard Gaudier, who was from Philadelphia. And so she moved to Philadelphia. She had 3 boys. The first was Emilio, the second was Federico, and the third was Adolfo. And unfortunately, Isidoro died in 1838 when Federico, I believe, was probably around 7 years old. After his death, Emily and her boys moved back to or moved to Philadelphia. The boys had never been there before since they were born in Cuba, and were raised by Emily, and eventually she remarried. And so raised by their stepfather and mother. What's interesting about this too is we were able to track their address. And so if you look it up, they lived at 222 Spruce Street. This is something I pulled up from Google Maps. So I hope it's the correct house. And we do know the address. So I'm assuming it is. And I look at this and wonder if the people inside realize the richness of the family that had lived here at one point in the 19th century. I'm going to go back to Federico so you can see him. The boys ended up going to Central High School and spent quite a bit of time there. I think I do have an image. This is Adolfo. He was also in the Civil War. Emilio is the only one who stayed behind. And then here's a picture of Central High School. This is actually the second building, which would have been in the 1850s. I want to say 1854 is when the second building opened. And I think they've had 3 different locations. It's one of the oldest high schools, I believe, in Philadelphia. And so the 3 boys went there, and Federico ended up taking a course in engineering, and eventually after graduation and getting his, I'll call it certification for engineering, he ended up from that training program working as a civil engineer, and eventually even did topography for the Panama Canal. So his reach from Philadelphia was pretty wide into the world. Eventually, he joined the U.S. Federal Army, volunteered with the 23rd Pennsylvania Infantry, and I have a whole laundry list of items because his experience in the Civil War was so rich. He served as an engineer and topographer. He was with a hot air balloon unit of the Army of the Potomac, and so he would go up as an engineer into the hot air balloons, look at the layout of everything going on in the different battles and sort of campaigns, and do sketches and troop movements, and look at the topography to see where everyone was located and what was happening at any given time. It was a really important task, and he became well known actually within the Civil War Federal Army and so forth. On April 19th, he was in Thaddeus Lowe's Constitution balloon during the Peninsular Campaign in Virginia, and he sketched a whole number of enemy positions at that point. And I'm not sure where the original is located, but in the public commons, there is an image, and I'll forward there a little bit. This was one of his sketches that he did from that hot air balloon. Showing the Army of the Potomac and some of the layout of where they were. Other stuff that he did at the time in the Civil War is he commanded the regiment at the Battle of Gettysburg in the absence of Colonel Collis. He also ended up being captured during the regiment's retreat across Cemetery Ridge, and ended up in Libby Prison in Richmond, Virginia. He ended up writing about his experience. He was there for 6 months. He had been wounded at Gettysburg as well. So when he went into the prison, he wasn't that great health-wise, and when he came out, he was not much better. So he came back to Philadelphia and tried to work on recovery from his poor health. But almost immediately accepted another position with General David Birney's staff, and he served there until Birney's death in October of 1864. And then there, at the end of the Civil War, he ended up taking a position as a consul in Cuba, because I think, you know, throughout his entire life, he still had that love of father country and wanted to be back in Cuba. So he spent a number of years as consul after the Civil War. And then eventually I guess it was called the 10 Years' War with Cuba, 1868 to 1878. Both he and his brother ended up joining as insurgents, while his brother Emilio, the oldest brother, stayed back in Philadelphia and helped fundraise. So this was all going on in Philadelphia at the same time that they're doing all that stuff in Cuba. Back to the balloon. So the piece that we have on display is this amazing, fairly large painting of the Battle of Fredericksburg. And it's actually a depiction of, let's see, the assault on Mary's Heights. And the date of it is December 13th, 1862. And so we're looking at this image, and you can see this giant ridge. You see all these Confederate troops. There are, of course, some Union troops in there as well. You can see by the flags. But this was a huge and incredibly painful, bloody, full of death kind of battle. And I'm going to share something that is from the National Park Service, so you get a kind of sense of what Federico Cavada was actually portraying here. And so here we have Union soldiers had to leave the city, descend into a valley bisected by a water-filled canal ditch, and ascend an open slope of 400 yards to reach the base of the heights. Artillery atop Mary's Heights and nearby elevations would thoroughly blanket the Federal approach. Quote, "A chicken could not live on that field when we open on it," boasted a Confederate cannoneer. The assault was relentless. In 1 hour, the Army of the Potomac lost nearly 3,000 men, all towards the stone wall. Eventually, Burnside withdrew. Lee, with his Confederates, suffered 5,300 casualties. Federal troops suffered more than 2 times that. 12,600 killed, wounded, or missing. Almost 2/3 fell in front of that stone wall. So they never actually even reached the target that they were looking for. And so this sort of unassuming, and you look at this and not really sure what it's depicting, but then when you realize the number of people that were injured, killed, maimed, whatever, it's pretty intense. And so you look at too this young guy who was doing so much and so active in the Civil War, and eventually sort of where he went with all of that. He was a really well-rounded, amazing engineer, artist, author, naturalist. He actually wrote for Harper's Weekly some sort of serial thing about caves in Cuba. So not only is he doing all this insurgents and military and caring for his country and so forth, but he's also looking at nature and beyond. I think he would have been a really fascinating person to learn more about. So my last artist that I wanted to focus on is Francis Schell, and he's somebody that we don't know a whole lot about. His dates are 1830 to 1909. We don't know much about his formative training, and what his life was like as a young child. Um, I'm not even sure exactly where he was born. I'd have to sort of do a little bit more digging for that. But we do know that he spent a lot of time traveling as an artist in the Civil War, particularly for Leslie's Illustrated newspaper, as well as Harper's Weekly. And he has a ton and amazing amounts of sketches. And you can see they're very sketchy. This piece that we have on display in Philadelphia Revealed is really interesting because it's depicting an event. And if you look closely, it was navigating a canal in North Carolina, and there were snakes falling from the trees. And so the depiction has these snakes falling on top of these gentlemen that are in this canal boat as they were navigating the waters during the Civil War. After, and you'll see some other sketches that we have from Francis Schell also on display. After the Civil War was over, he ended up settling down in Philadelphia, spending most of his time there, a little bit of time in New York, and he became the head of the art department for Leslie's Illustrated newspaper. He ended up becoming a lithographer as well in partnership with Thomas Hogan, and they worked together for 30 years. Ended up publishing a whole number of books, particularly some compendiums about the Civil War. And I want to say that quite a bit of that material ended up coming from some of his sketches that he had done, particularly in the Civil War. Now, early on in the history of the Atwater Kent Museum, some of these sketchbooks had come up for auction, and the museum in its foresight ended up purchasing quite a few of these. So we have a lot of, probably over 700 pieces that were done by Francis Schell. Of different types of sketches, and not just Civil War. There's a large portion of that, but then there's material that goes beyond that. And some of it is very sketchy in its style, as you can see here. Some of it's random people and individuals, um, including people at church or walking down the street or some sort of street fair, stuff like that. But you know, he must have always had a pencil and pad in hand wherever he was going so that he could sketch. Some other pieces in the exhibit include, this is a little bit, let's say, not as sketchy as the Civil War imagery, sketchbooks, drawings. This is actually the Girard Avenue Bridge that's leading to the 1876 fairgrounds. And so you look at this and you can kind of see the dome in the background of what is still Memorial Hall in Fairmount Park, and then some other structures that, of course, are no longer there. But it has a lot of the imagery that you sort of imagine when you're seeing the 1876 World's Fair, with tons of people walking across the bridge, horses and carriages, different kinds of conveyances taking people, streetcars, horses and carriages, the train going across the bridge. There's a boat on the water taking people up the Schuylkill to the fairgrounds, and so forth. What's interesting about this is you can actually see the final version in this scan from a Harper's Weekly. There's a very large, 3-inch almost size book of all of the Harper's Weekly newspapers bound together that we have in the collection. And so this is actually the final version from that original sketch slash painting. I think it was more monochrome, maybe what is it, gouache type drawing that was done to depict what was going on here at the outside the fairgrounds leading into Fairmount Park and the 1876 World's Fair. The next one we have is of the Chinese pavilion inside the fairgrounds. And this is a sketch, again, more like a gouache, watercolory type sketch of what he kind of wanted with the Chinese pavilion, and unpacking. It was quite a sight to see the China delegation coming and bringing their materials for the first time. So this was a massive sight to see. And this is one of those things where it's very sketchy. It's from one of those sketchbooks, in style, very simple. And then this is what the engraving ended up looking like when it was published in Harper's Weekly. And so you can see the elements from the drawing that then ended up to be part of that final imagery. I love that large thin crate there off to the right, and how it looks whenever you see it there in the final. Yeah. So those are the last of my artists that I wanted to talk about. I will say all of the materials that you can see on display in the exhibition are in our online portal, so you can visit the various objects. We're slowly, and as part of the evaluation process, going to be bringing everything that's in the collection online. It's going to take a while with over 130,000 items. We just when was it? Maybe a month ago, added our 10,000th item, which we were very excited about because it is taking quite some time to get this done. And we're excited too because it's never been done before. The collection's never been virtually available in any way, shape, or form, except in sort of random pictures here or there. So we're looking forward to sort of continuing that as we continue working with the collection. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Stacey. That was amazing. I learned so much about some of the artworks that are on view in the exhibition that I feel like I haven't even seen, even though I've walked by them so many times. Particularly that the painting by at the Battle of Fredericksburg. I went to college in Fredericksburg, and I can totally picture those hills, which are
Oh,
kind of
cool.
still there. Yeah. Anyway, so thank you so much. If you do have questions, you can put them in the chat, and I can read them out. You can raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can put them in the Q&A function. And while we're doing that, I just wanted to say that we are really, really, really grateful to the Behrend family for supporting the Art at Noon lecture series. It's my first time pitch hitting moderating, so you can tell that I'm catching up here. But they're supported in memory of Rose Susan Hirschhorn Behrend, who was a former docent, longtime docent here at PAFA. So we're really, really grateful for their continued support and friendship. And if you enjoy this series, please keep coming back and being a part of it. Okay, so let's see. I think I see Donald, your hand is up. Would you like to ask your question and come off?
Yes. Is the museum open to the public, and if there are costs involved or anything like that, Stacey?
Well, I can answer that question. Or do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead.
We are open to the public Thursday through Sunday. Thursday, Friday, it's 10 a.m. to 4. Saturday, Sunday, it's 11 a.m. to 5. And there is a cost for admission. It's around $15, and there's discounts if you're a senior, a veteran, so on and so forth. Yes, you can check out our website, pafa.org, for more info on that.
What's the website again? I'm sorry. Say it again.
Here, I'll just drop it in the chat. It's
great. Thank you. I get it there.
pafa.org. Okay, and then I'm seeing some questions that are just sent directly to me. Oh, well, Daniel had a question that went to everyone, it looks like. Who is responsible for the digital rendering of the exhibition space? The SketchUp?
I assume you mean the drawing that I shared with the graphic of our Philadelphia Revealed, and we worked with Metcalf Architecture and Design, so they did the layout for everything and sort of the design of the space, and so they created our floor plans and so forth.
Great. And okay, sorry, there's one more question in the chat, and then Bren, I'll get to you. And you can also use the hand raise function on Zooms. Will the slides be available? I know everything's digitally collected online, but are you going to be sharing the slides at all?
I can share that with you, however you want to do that. That's fine. You just let me know, and I can share.
Great, we can send them out to everyone who participated. Okay, so Bren, it looks like you have a question. Oh, you're still muted.
We go. I've been to the Atwater Kent, and then I was at the History Museum, but I actually donated something to the History Museum, which is and not plastic. I guess it's plastic. A picnic basket from the 40s that my parents used to do picnicking, but I don't think it ever went on to display. And she had suggested to bring a picture of my parents, which I never did, to display it. So my question is, are you going to be displaying any other artifacts besides things that are related to artworks? And I will be coming on Friday also with a group.
Yeah, well, if you see the exhibit, it's more than just artwork. So we highlighted some of the artworks today. There's a lot of really interesting material that's on display, more than just artwork. So we're talking things related to incarceration, things related to city services. So there's an original wooden water pump. There's candy making materials from Young's Candy Company, a variety of toys. So you name it, there's going to be something that you can see on display. And you can imagine with 130,000 objects, it is hard to display everything. But I will say, when we emptied out the museum in 2018 and moved everything back into the warehouse to sort of do inventory and everything, only 276 items had been on display, which is really, really minuscule compared to everything that was in the collection. And so we're really proud of the fact that we were able to include so many materials in this exhibition. So having the space at PAFA to be able to spread out a little bit and share those items. So and look for the portal. At some point, the picnic basket will show up in the online portal, and you'll be able to see it. And we would love to have that photograph of your family. If they're using it, it would be fantastic.
Well, it's my parents. They're since deceased. I'm old myself, so my parents are deceased. But yeah, they used it in the 40s. It's metal. I said plastic. It's a metal, large.
Okay.
It's a large.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, yes, Melissa, thank you for, you're prompting me to remind everyone that we have some free days coming up, including this weekend or tomorrow, September 26th, 27th, and October 6th, and then November 24th. So come to the museum tomorrow. Brittany wants to know if there are artworks that did not make it into the show, and if you have any favorite artworks.
It's good. A lot of people do ask me, like, what are some of your favorites? And I can say on different days, I have different things. Like sometimes I really love the photography of Frederick Gudekunst, who was a really rich Philadelphia photographer. And I'd love to do more and dig more into some of his life, into some of his photography. And we have some really cool photographs of his that are on display, but also that aren't currently on display. There's some really cool, of course, founding father portraits, a lot of the Charles Wilson Peale and any Peale family member paintings are really cool and fun. So again, it's sort of like any given day, it could change. It could change for me. I think probably one of my most favorite things on display right now is a large 11-foot panoramic photograph of the 1876 World Fairgrounds that we have on display. And it was the world's largest photograph at the time. Only 4 were made. And you can kind of see the lines of how it was sort of merged together on the paper, eventually printed out into this very long thing. But it's such a great depiction of what Fairmount Park looked like in 1876 that it's just gorgeous.
Great. And did you, kind of relatedly, did you deaccession any works when you had to clean out the museum?
No, we haven't deaccessioned anything and don't plan on doing that in any time in the near future. The whole idea is behind this evaluation project is to look at everything that's here, document all the paperwork, look at every single piece of paper, which we've had. Paige Talbot is our evaluation person who looked at the paper. I've looked at all the digital records. Early on in the process, I had started counting all the different edits that I had been doing in the database. And I finally got up to 10 million and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm not counting anymore. You know that it's a lot of information, so much data, that it's a constant, there's a lot of work to do. Let's just say that. There's a lot of work to do and we'll be doing it for quite some time.
So impressive, and congratulations on all the photography you guys are doing. Okay, also relatedly, are you still looking for certain items from Philly history?
Yes, we are. Now we can't officially collect just yet while we're still hammering out the last of the legal logistics, but there are, as we've been doing the evaluation process, we found a number of gaps in collecting where we need some things, some of it very contemporary. So when we started managing the collection and looking at the evaluation, it was right in the midst of, or just prior to, and then during the pandemic. So there's Philadelphia pandemic materials that we'd love to have as part of the collection. There's some Black Lives Matter material. And then looking back at the collection itself, there's big gaps related to music. And so something that I've always wanted, there was nothing for Live Aid in 1985. We really don't have anything. There's the Made in America, the Jay-Z concert and stuff, some of that material. We don't really have anything related to that. And it's something that was pretty extensive on the Philadelphia music scene and landscape of American music. And then, but if you also look back to things like American Bandstand and Dick Clark, if you remember any of that, we don't have a whole lot of material. And I think of sort of, these were singers that my mom loved. And so I had 45 records that I played as a kid of people like Frankie Avalon and, and Jimmy Darren, who just unfortunately passed away, some of their stuff, and they, grew up in Philly and had a Philadelphia sound all their own. It would be great to have some material related to some of those people as well.
Yes. More questions. I'm looking for hands raised. Going back through the chat.
Hi.
Sorry.
Hello. Sorry, I just had a question.
Sure.
I really liked the statement about how there are all of these objects and there's a thread that goes between them. And I was wondering if you could tell us more about how these 3 artists in particular, how they kind of, they're connected.
Connected to each other?
Well, or in the context of Philadelphia.
Well, with I would say the majority of the artists that are depicted in the collection, these in particular, have really rich connections to Philadelphia, whether they came from Philadelphia or whether they worked in Philadelphia, or the impact that they had on Philadelphia. So, for example, while I don't know where Francis Schell was born, he spent a huge portion of his life here and ended up depicting a whole variety of Philadelphia-related history and lived a life, a rich life in Philadelphia. And so he's got this huge impact because of the work that he did. And then there's somebody like David Bustle Bowser and his wife who were embedded in the lives of their family and the people that they worked for in Philadelphia. And of course beyond. I think that sort of reach sort of goes beyond that. But the work that they created and produced was so impactful to the city of Philadelphia and beyond. And then you have Rembrandt Peale, who the Peale family is sort of synonymous with art in Philadelphia. And they also reached beyond. I mean, Rembrandt Peale himself was kind of more or less an itinerant artist because he did spend time all around the world doing different kinds of artwork. But I think the impact of, you know, Charles Wilson Peale starting his museum here in Philadelphia and then sort of extending its reach beyond that. You can't sort of negate how important Philadelphia is to these three individuals. Does that explain?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And this was
Great.
all very fascinating, going down these rabbit holes.
Oh, rabbit holes are the best.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, Tony, go ahead.
Tony, yeah. So for instance, for music, like what kinds of things would you collect? If someone wanted, you know, what kinds of things would you be looking for?
It's a good question. So we don't want to sort of accept things sort of without sort of planning and forethought. We want to sort of look at comprehensively the stuff that we have and sort of think about where gaps might be missing, what's important to the city of Philadelphia, whether it's based off of a person, whether it's based off of a company. You know, there's let's just say there's a whole restaurant scene out there. There's always been a restaurant scene in Philadelphia from the taverns that started in the 18th and 17th centuries, and what was created from that. There's a lot of ephemera that is lost over time because people don't think it's important enough to keep. And so, you know, it all depends, you know, if it's a company, like what kind of mark did that company make on the landscape of Philadelphia and the business, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a printmaking company. We have some material by the Aiken Printing Company. And a lot of the material that they did was for African American businesses and nightclubs. And so we have an invitation, for example, from an early band of Patti LaBelle's. And so it's just a little tiny piece of paper, but it's something that the band didn't live very long. It didn't exist very long. But certainly Patti LaBelle has made a huge mark on Philadelphia. It's great to see this little piece of the evolution of the career of Patti LaBelle in Philadelphia. And so
I'm sure you wouldn't want like albums or album covers or, you know, do you think that at some point you'll have something on your website, a form that people can fill out and submit and say, this is what I have, and you can say,
yes,
oh,
absolutely.
but it's not what, because that would probably be the easiest than just sending stuff in, correct?
No. And I had a gentleman reach out because he had a house that he was going to empty out.
Yeah.
I don't have time to look at the entire contents of a house, but there may be materials in there. So we're willing to open up any kind of conversation, and so we can sort of guide that to whatever direction that we need to do. So we're happy to sort of have those conversations. You can always reach out to me, and Leah and PAFA can have my contact information to share.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, I'm getting some chats wanting to get in touch with you, Stacey, so I will shepherd those post haste.
Great.
But we also have a question. Does the Philadelphia Orchestra have its own archives, and are they digitized? Do you know about that?
I believe they might have something. I'm not sure about digitization though. There's a lot of places out there that have a lot of materials that they need to do some archiving and so forth.
I believe they're at the University of Pennsylvania, at least in part.
Yeah, I would think they have.
Oh yeah, you're right. Thanks, Melissa.
We have about 5 more minutes before 1 o'clock. Are there any last questions for Stacey? I'm just looking for any hands raised. Okay, hearing none, I will say thank you so much again, Stacey. This has been fantastic. Thank you to the Behrend family again for supporting us. And please come check out Philadelphia Revealed. It is open through December 1st. And we'd love to see you there. And as Melissa mentioned, we have free days coming up today, or I'm sorry, tomorrow and Friday. And please check back on the website for more information about our hours and closures and all of that. And we will look forward to seeing you back here next Wednesday at 12 p.m. We are going to have Allie Prince, who is the curator of Layers of Liberty, Philadelphia and the Appalachian Environment, give a talk about that show. So I think it'll be a really nice complement to this one. So without further ado, thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.